arrived at in terms of the national minimum wage is not a living wage. I will get into some details on that. But this forms a firm foundation of moving our country towards a living wage. It is a start. These agreements are the outcome of nearly 2 years of deliberations, as I said. They are a response to the call that was made by President Zuma in the Declaration on Wage Inequality that was signed yesterday, and labor stability. The social partners confirm the principles that have underpinned their deliberations and which form the basis for the agreements that have been reached. They assert that the most immediate national priorities are the creation of jobs on a massive scale, the reduction in inequality, and the alleviation of poverty. Extreme levels of wage inequality, in particular, contribute in significant measure to the persistence of widespread poverty in our country and serve to constrain economic growth as well as social development. They also assert that accelerated economic growth, higher rates of investment, improved productivity, and faster job creation require a stable labor market environment in which the rights and responsibility of all stakeholders are respected and are also promoted. In pursuit of these objectives, the social partners have reached agreement on the modalities for the introduction of a national minimum wage of 20 Rand an hour to be implemented from no later than the 1st of May in 2018. This figure translates to about 3,500 for those who work a 40-hour per week and about 3,900 for those who work a 45-hour week. But because workers calculate their earnings on an hourly rate, the panel that we had appointed to advise us highlighted the issue of the 20 Rand, and the 20 Rand translates for 40 hours per week over a month to 3,500, and over a 45-hour week over the full month to 3,900. The national minimum wage, which is a floor below which no worker may be paid, will significantly improve the lives of millions of low-paid workers and begin to address the challenge of wage inequality in our country. At its introduction next year, South Africa will join several countries around the world that have implemented a national minimum wage as an instrument of economic as well as social development. The social partners have resolved to set the national minimum wage at a level that has meaningful impact on the wages of the lowest paid worker, while minimizing any negative impact on employment. In other words, in arriving at this figure, which, by the way, was recommended by the advisory panel, which did thoroughgoing research and reflection, we're seeking to balance the issue of increasing the wages of up to 6.6 million workers. Truth be told, we are a country where 6.6 million workers still earn below 3,500 a month. Now, this wage could easily have been 20,000 rand, 10,000 rand, could easily have been 5,000 rand. In doing so, there would have been a negative impact where many workers would have lost their jobs by the introduction of an overly high minimum wage. But at the same time, what we are seeking to balance is that the wage that we set in place should have an impact of lifting the lowest paid workers, so that those workers, 6.6 million in our economy, who are earning below 3,500, should see their wages go up. And by so doing, we begin the process of reducing income inequality. And as I said, this is not a living wage. This is a wage below which we're saying no worker in South Africa should be paid. Right now, 6.6 million workers are earning way below that 3,500. Now, quite often it is said nobody can live on 3,500, and it is true. But 6.6 million workers are living on that today. We would like to see a living wage for all workers in South Africa. If we get to the living wage that we all desire, it will wipe out a lot of jobs. But what we are saying is that we now need to begin in earnest on this journey of improving the income of our workers. And many of these workers are not even unionized. Many of them do not even belong to unions. And these are workers that we need to care for. Now, what this will also do is to give unions a platform to be able to advocate for higher wages, living wages, and so forth. Now, the balance that we've sought to strike is to say the minimum wage must not be too low as not to have an impact on 6.6 million workers, but it should not also be too high to lead to massive job losses. Now, this national minimum wage will be overseen by a National Minimum Wage Commission, which will be established to recommend annual adjustments to the level of this wage. In other words, we foresee a process through which, having started where we are, this national minimum wage will be adjusted on an annual basis. The national minimum wage will also be regularly reviewed to take into account the impact of the level of unemployment and poverty and inequality. And when the National Commission takes into account, it will need to take into account a number of factors when it reviews the national minimum wage and also adjust it. It will have to take inflation into account. It will need to take our GDP growth. It will also need to take ILO, in other words, International Labour Organization guidelines. It will also need to take a number of other benchmarks in the economy and also the impact on employment. Businesses that are unable to afford the national minimum wage will be allowed to apply for an exemption. There may well be businesses that feel that they are not able to afford this minimum wage, and there could be a number of them. And rather than close their operations and retrench workers, we're saying they should come forward and apply for exemption. And the exemption will last for a year, and they will need to give reasons why they want to be exempted. And any fragile sectors that are having difficulty in complying with the national minimum wage will be considered for assistance within the available means, including through incentives. In other words, we are going to put in place a number of measures that will seek to assist those businesses that may be having difficulties. We are essentially saying businesses should not opt for closure, reduction of hours, retrenching workers. We are saying assistance will be put in place for them to come forward and argue their case. So we will put in place a number of mitigating factors so that we do not have massive job losses. The social partners in NEDLAC will finalize discussions over the next few weeks on issues such as the National Minimum Wage Commission's institutional arrangements. They will also finalize matters such as the daily working hours and the status also of the expanded public works program participants. The commission will be made up of 3 representatives from business, from labor, and from community-based organizations, and we will also appoint 4 independent experts who will constitute this commission, who will now be setting the national minimum wage on an ongoing basis. And the Department of Labor will be in charge of that whole process. The question arose, so that we are clear on this, on whether participants in the Extended Public Works Employment Program by the national minimum wage or not. Now there are 2 positions. The one position is that they should be excluded because they are not fully described as employees in the classical sense, because they are paid a stipend. And they are also protected in some ways in terms of decent work provisions, but they are not classified as employees. The other proposal is that they should also be covered. Now, in the term of this administration, as some of you will know, there will be 6 million participants who will be covered, who will participate in extended public works programs. Some of them do community work, some of them work on fire, some of them work on water, as many of you will know. The partners in NEDLAC are still going to engage in discussions on this matter to finalize their thinking, and thereafter there will be a conclusion and an announcement on whether they are covered or not. Significantly, the parties have agreed on a need for an evaluation on the quality and working conditions of people engaged in all these public employment programs. So that program will be evaluated to see how best it is working. The social partners will be undertaking extensive public consultations following this announcement to inform the public, to inform working people all over the country about this. And we would like to invite all and sundry, employers and trade unions also, to be out there to explain to our people how all this will work. As part of a comprehensive set of measures to improve labor stability, the social partners also signed an accord on collective bargaining and industrial action, in which all social partners commit to take steps that are necessary to ensure that the collective bargaining process in our country is a bargaining process that is engaged in positively, that all parties to a negotiation process in the workplace commit themselves to working according to the rules, and also that we should prevent violence, intimidation, and destruction to property, and also to improve the capacity of the social partners and the agencies to resolve disputes peacefully and expeditiously. The Accord stresses that by all means we should find ways of resolving our disputes in a peaceful manner through negotiations. They have also adopted a code of good practice on collective bargaining, industrial action, and picketing that provides practical guidance on collective bargaining, the resolution of disputes, and the resort to peaceful industrial action. The deliberations have resulted in an agreement on the proposed amendments that will be effective to the Labour Relations Act to strengthen provisions of the extension of bargaining council agreements, picketing rules, strike balloting, and the resolution of industrial disputes through mechanisms such as advisory arbitration whenever there are difficult strikes. When implemented, these proposed amendments will provide employers and working people with mechanisms to resolve disputes more effectively, as well as expeditiously, and minimize the potential to have protracted and violent industrial action. The agreement signed yesterday underlined our conviction that working together as government and business and labor and communities, we are always able to achieve a great deal. This is a process that has proven over and over again that when the four parties are able to sit together, they are able to resolve any problem. These agreements give us hope that there is no challenge that cannot be overcome. In conclusion, I just wish for myself to extend my gratitude to all the members of the Committee of Principals who guided this process, for their contribution and commitment to ensure the success of the process. I also wish to thank the advisory panel which we appointed to advise us on the level of the national minimum wage. They did a great deal of work, and they also brought a great deal of insights and wise counsel. And we thank them for that, because through their work they laid the foundation to enable all the social partners in NEDLAC to be able finally to grasp the nettle and arrive at an agreement on the level of the national minimum wage. Our deliberations in the course of the 2 years show that social dialogue in our country remains necessary to resolve a number of problems and challenges. It is still relevant, it is a vibrant process, and it always results in the best results for our people. Finally, I wish to convey my sincere gratitude to the Minister of Labour, Ms. Mildred Oliphant, and also to the President for his leadership and her leadership as well, and guidance in the course of executing this mandate, and for leading and enabling our process of moving South Africa forward. I believe that this is quite a historic development in our country, that we finally have a national minimum wage, which no doubt is not going to make everybody happy and excited, but at the same time, a national minimum wage which is going to lift the income levels of no less than 6 million workers who currently are earning below 3,500. Yes, it could have been lifted to any number you can choose, 5,000, 10,000. It could have led to dire consequences with more loss of jobs. At this level, we believe we've created a balance that gives us a platform to begin the process of improving the income levels of our people. And let me stress once again, this is not a living wage. This is not meant to be a wage that people can live on. It is a wage through which we are going to lift 6.6 million people and give them an opportunity to have the incomes that they are earning a lot higher. But the other historic moment is the fact that all the partners have now been able to get to grips with the issue of labor stability, so that if there are disputes, we now have added processes, added rules, added mechanisms that can enable us to find each other between employers and employees in strike situations, so as to limit long or elongated strikes, but also to make sure that our strikes become the type of disputes that can find resolution without a breakdown into violence, damage to property, and all that. That was the objective that the government had in mind to address these matters, and fortunately, we found that the partners that we were negotiating with were also willing to address these matters. And let me end by saying, these agreements are not Cyril Ramaphosa's agreements. They are agreements that have been arrived at by a group of people, a group of organizations that are widely representative, that represent working people, business people, community-based organizations, as well as the government. So this is a collective effort. It is not something that was sucked out of the thumb of one person's mouth. It is an agreement that binds all these parties that I've been referring to. With that, I thank you. Thank you very much. Well, they are not going to get the minimum wage, so it means very little to them.
Thank the Deputy President for his address.
So there you have it. The minimum wage agreement has officially been signed. It actually happened on Tuesday. That was yesterday when the agreement was signed at a ceremony. The initial amount of 20 Rand apparently will be reviewed annually to assess its impact on employment. Deputy President Cyril Ramaphosa also saying the new wage will translate to 3,500 for workers who are working 40 hours a week. And for those who are working 45 hours a week, 3,900. He also mentioned that they're putting mitigating factors in place to avoid job losses from the minimum wage agreement. Also for businesses that will not be able to afford this minimum wage, they will be allowed to apply for an exemption, and also to give reasons why they're not able to afford this. Of course, all these changes will come into effect on the 1st of May in 2018. COSATU, they're still having reservations about the minimum wage agreement. They raised a number of issues, including the number of working hours and the annual increment of